Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It's the Korean Bookworm, and I wanted to very informally and casually update you guys on how things have been going and how I've been doing, because you might have seen that the last video I uploaded was in August, and that's where I talked about textbooks and such. But ever since then, I've been a little bit radio silent, and there's good reason for that, and that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to tell you basically what I've been up to since like August till now. Basically, also a little bit about my educational background because I noticed that I've never done so explicitly in the past. And the main reasoning is because I try to kind of protect my own, you could say, personal information and privacy when making YouTube videos. I don't want to give too much away just because I had unpleasant experiences on social media and with cyber attacks and such before. So I really want to protect myself in that regard, and that's why I never explicitly mentioned my name, nor you could say where I am explicitly at for these exact reasons, I'd say. But I feel like I know enough now to know what to give away and what to still keep to myself. So we can properly dive into things now. So basically, the structure I'm going to give this video overall is I'm going to tell you where I'm at now and how I got there. So a little bit of also not just my bachelor education, but also a little bit of my high school experience, as it was a bit unconventional, but maybe hopefully it serves to maybe inspire anyone out there to kind of persist, regardless if their background is a bit unconventional. And then my bachelor experience itself, and then my current experience with my master's now. So right now I'm basically at a different place compared to where I was since I moved to the Netherlands. And you might notice it in terms of background, like the background looks almost the same, but you can notice the guitar is now leaning on the bookshelf, and there's also a whiteboard there, which was a really nice investment because I could like do all my calculations without wasting as much paper. And also, if I were to decide to, let's say, film a video of me explaining some derivation, I can do so at home now instead of always having to go to university. But yeah, I moved basically because I started my master's in theoretical physics from September onwards at the University of Amsterdam. Before that, I did my bachelor's at the University of Maastricht, and specifically in a program called the Maastricht Science Programme. This is a bachelor in liberal arts and sciences that is a natural science program. You can choose courses from chemistry, physics, biology, and neuroscience, and kind of do what you will, let's say, to make something at the end. And my experiences with this was quite nice. There are, of course, criticisms I have with the program personally, which I will get into. But at the end, I think it was definitely worthwhile. So before I do that, though, I wanted to state clearly like why I said a little bit earlier that my background, at least high school wise, isn't as conventional. So I first and foremost, I followed the Dutch school system as someone born in the Caribbean, or the specific Caribbean island I was born on. So basically, because I followed the Dutch school system, it means that for high school, the school system is separated into three, you could say, branches. There's another fourth one, but I don't know as much about it to talk confidently about it, so I won't. But I know the three main ones, and I went through all of these three basically. And the first one is something called VMBO. By the way, if you're curious about the Dutch school system and a more, like it's a nice explanation of it, I will recommend this video right here, which is rather short but explains it really well. Or if for some reason you like diving into school structures, I can recommend you this video right here, which is a bit more in depth, you could say, of a look at it. But both of them I think are equally good. But anyways, so after elementary school, you make this test and you're tested on whether or not you should go to this VMBO track or the other two track, which is something called HAVO and VWO, which HAVO is akin to general high school education. So much like, for example, in the US, it would be like your standard high school, and VWO is pre-university, which is more akin to A levels, let's say. I went to this more vocational track because of how I scored on my test, and there typically that lasts 4 years, but for me it took 5 years because the first year didn't go so well. So I had to redo that, and then at the end finish my VMBO. And after that, I knew even throughout VMBO and even as I was far younger that I wanted to do something that was more related to university. At the time, at least, when I was far younger, I thought that would to be medicine. My interest, of course, as many people have shifted over time. Like it went from like medicine to archaeology one time for very silly reasons. And then when I went to HAVO eventually, so when I finished those 5 years at vocational school or preparatory vocational school, I went to general education, so HAVO. It shifted from the interest I had before, which was by the end of HAVO coming back to medicine. It went to psychology because got quite curious about clinical psychology, especially, and reading books, for example, like by people like Oliver Sacks and others who wrote about these very interesting, you could say, cases of people that had disorders that really kind of bordered the edge between behavioral and physiological. And for me, that was a really interesting place to be at, and tackling it through psychological means. So I was very curious, and HAVO, by the way, typically lasts 5 years. But if you came from VMBO, which means you already did like 4 years, it would typically take you only 2 years or 3 years. I went the 3 year route for very specific reasons, which I won't go into. But even then, like my first year at HAVO didn't go well again. So it took me 4 years. And the reason that third year didn't go well is because honestly, I didn't have the work ethic that you need to really kind of succeed in terms of HAVO. Because HAVO, the courses are a bit more theoretical than preparatory vocational educations. You have to really care a little bit more about spending time with the material, about actually being, you could say, consistently engaged with your classes, at least the bare minimum, let's say, engaged, and doing your homework to actually succeed. And admittedly, I didn't prioritize quite a lot of those things. So I had quite a bit to learn there. But thankfully, or very luckily, I was able to still stay, because normally, if you fail that first year you're in like HAVO, especially if you came from VMBO, they'd kick you out. But I was luckily allowed to be able to stay. And then it went much better the second time around. And in that second year, which I was in HAVO, it's also when I started discovering my love for astronomy and physics. By the end of that year, I started getting into reading a lot more because of, like, at school, we're required to read, but I got curious and started reading books besides that. And I saw clips on YouTube of Cosmos, like the old Cosmos with Carl Sagan. And I absolutely loved his blend of science communication and talking about very specific technical things, like especially his explanation of how we can test that the Earth is round by just looking at shadows of two buildings, like with Eratosthenes and such. I absolutely loved his combination of explaining such technical things with such poetic, you could say, gestures and means. Like, to me, that was just perfect. He emphasized how science basically is not just this dull thing, this collection of dry facts, but it's a way of thinking. It's a way of analyzing problems and trying to see how you solve them through this very critical and empirical lens. I absolutely fell in love basically with like the scientific approach, and especially with astronomy, like because of Carl Sagan. And I bought the book Cosmos and read it, which I still have. You can see it exactly right behind me there. And that was a very transformative experience for me. And I also read The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene, which was another really interesting thing because it showed me that physics, besides learning about electricity, batteries and such, which I didn't appreciate at the time, now I do. But honestly, you need that spark to show you that physics is interesting before you can appreciate the simple stuff. At least that's what I think. I didn't have that before with my classes, but I did get it with both Cosmos and especially The Elegant Universe, because if you know about that book is a popular science book explaining string theory. And in order to do so, it needs to explain both quantum mechanics and general relativity. So it's what introduced me to these notions of physics being very weird at a very small scale, even though, again, I couldn't follow the entirety of the book because honestly, I wasn't mature enough to understand some of these concepts. And also general relativity, this whole notion of space-time and Einstein's theories, like they were quite intriguing for me at the time. So I knew that I really started to like physics and astronomy up to at this point, and also because it made astronomy, at least made a lot of my stargazing have a little bit more meaning, because at first I was really captured by stargazing already, like seeing all the stars and recognizing some patterns and such, and especially looking at the moon and learning about the different, you could say, areas that are already named on the moon, like the Sea of Tranquility, Moscow Sea, and all these different regions. But it didn't have much more meaning beyond just interesting facts about the sky. But now I can suddenly look at the sky and think about, how did the planets come to be? Like, or those stars, those tiny little dots, like every one of them has a solar system much like our own sun. Imagine the possibility of what other interesting types of planets and maybe even possible types of life might be out there. Like, this is the spark I got from Sagan's Cosmos, and it's the thing that, like, as I kept, I'm kind of like a broken cassette now, but it's the thing that really sparked me, basically, and I'm really grateful for that experience. So after that onwards, I still thought that I might want to be interested in doing psychology, an interest that eventually shifted by the end of my general high school education back to medicine. And when I got into pre-university, which was like VWO, and that only takes basically 2 years if you've already done HAVO. And thankfully, I didn't fail any year there. But that basically in those 2 years, I thought, okay, I'm gonna try to basically apply for medicine, but I also knew that I wanted to do physics at the time, so I knew that I was gonna apply for physics as well. And basically, I didn't get into the selection like procedure for medicine, but that really turned out to have been a blessing in disguise, because it meant that I had zero excuses anymore to ignore physics and really pursue it. And that, I think, was extremely nice, because I finally could, like, unapologetically, like, go for physics. And also, I must say, another reason I liked it already in high school is because I was noticing how bits of chemistry, and also especially my mathematics, was really tying into the physics. And I really liked my math classes the most throughout all of my high school experiences. So it really gave math a sense of purpose to me. Like, it gave it a nice dressing for me to say, oh, that's why I'm enjoying and having fun with all these puzzling like tricks. It's not only math for math's sake, and I'm even figured out at some point that I don't like pure mathematics, because if I did, I would have pursued a degree in pure mathematics. But I like it in the context of what it tells you about the real world, and it's why, of course, eventually I chose physics. I still like talking to mathematicians, and in my master's now, I have a lot of mathematician friends, and they're really interesting people to talk to, because some of these abstract ideas are intrinsically fascinating to me, but it's not things I would want to work on developing myself and researching. Like, I respect people already doing it, much like I respect people already doing stuff in medicine or biomedicine and such. Like, to me, that's also a very fascinating field, but it's something I know that it's not for me. I know there are people better fitted to do that. Basically, after finishing VWO, my pre-university, came to the Netherlands, and that's where I moved to Maastricht and started out my bachelor program, which was a really interesting experience. So the learning curve, let's say, for my program wasn't too steep, my bachelor's. It was nice. It was at a pace I could manage. And basically, we started out with these core courses that covered all the fun basic sciences again in the first semester of the first year, kind of theoretically, at least, to bring everyone up to the same speed. And afterwards, you're free to choose whatever you want. And that's where I started choosing my math, physics, and programming courses. Now, periods in this bachelor program were quite short. So what I mean by periods is that one semester, so a half of a year, is separated into 3 periods typically. So the first 2 periods are all 6 weeks, excluding exams. And the third period is something called the project period. And in that period, you need to focus on a project, and that lasts 4 weeks typically, so a month. With the 6 weeks of courses, you can cover a lot of material, but with some courses, it is really hard to dive into a lot of depth. For example, if I think some of the math courses, you can really do it in 6 weeks. Like, you can do ordinary differential equations in 6 weeks, or you can do linear algebra. Again, with both of those, you miss some details, but you can still cover the gist of what you need in the 6 weeks. But for example, with some of the foundational physics courses like electrodynamics or To some extent, thermodynamics, you can do it in 6 weeks, but there's still a lot of stuff that you leave out. But especially, I think with electrodynamics, that one definitely, you cannot cover everything in 6 weeks. You can cover a lot, but not everything. And that is something I definitely felt later on, especially now in my master's. So that made that some of the higher level courses were quite a bit rougher because you had a shorter amount of time, and in each period, in each 6 week period, you typically take 2 courses of 5 credits and 1 lab or practical course of 2.5 credits. So you're always basically busy, and some periods it's a bit easier because the courses themselves are easier than others, periods where you're taking many advanced courses at the same time. So definitely you can imagine the second and third year being quite a challenge because of that. And because of those challenges, that made for certain gaps that will definitely segue into when I start talking about my master's. Besides that though, I did have a lot of really good experiences in terms of just generally learning about myself and about soft skills, basically, which I think are just crucial. So, for example, in project periods, you typically get some project, which is some problem. It might be some actual, you could say, research open problem. Very small aspect of it, of course, though, or it could be what I like to call toy problems, which are just basically practice problems for students. And most of the projects I chose were pretty much toy problems, but they were still really educational because a lot of the projects you're free to basically choose like your preferences in terms of what projects you might want to do. Most of the ones I chose were with intent. They were because I wanted to learn a particular skill or I wanted to learn about a particular topic, and a lot of them aligned with my interests. Like most of them were on observational astronomy. Like I did projects on radio telescopes. I did an educational project on designing some experiments to introduce students to quantum mechanics, and I did several other projects. But after my first year, most of the other projects I did were actually what we also called student-led projects. And that's where you can design your own project, propose it to like the people that are organizing these things. And if it sounds promising, you are allowed to basically run your own project and you kind of dictate how it goes. There's still a supervisor that is a staff member kind of making sure everything's going well. But for the most part, you're in control then. And you can really then do what you want. And me and a really good other student and friend of mine did both the 2 times we ran a project together, and that was really nice because it really gave me a lot of opportunity to practice leadership qualities, which I think are really important, like how to assertively communicate, set deadlines, and have sharp boundaries, as well as how to kind of structure a project, which is a skill in and of itself. And both of the projects I did were actually really interesting observational astronomy projects. Like one of them was on a cataclysmic variable star, and that was the closest project I think we ever did to something that was more of an open problem, let's say. Because a group in the past that kind of did a project on using remote telescopes, using the iTelescope platform, which some of you might know. It's basically a platform where you can kind of take control of telescopes anywhere around the world. Like you can be sitting in the Netherlands and controlling a telescope in Australia. Like it's pretty cool stuff. They used this platform and they kind of were looking for supernovae and discovered a supernovae with a pretty distinct light curve and that hadn't been classified yet. As with many, you could say, objects out there in the sky. So they found this to be a cataclysmic variable candidate, like a type of star that pulsates in brightness very periodically, but that you don't know specifically what type of them it is, because there are many types of cataclysmic variables. So me and this other student designed a project around which we wanted to classify which specific cataclysmic variable star this is. In the span of 4 weeks, we couldn't do much, but we made at least some progress with determining the orbital period of this binary star, which is already a big step, I saw, because then I communicated and reached out to a researcher that was really well known in the field, and she acknowledged also that at least in that aspect, we pretty much hit the nail almost in the head. But with other aspects, we definitely needed to improve our data analysis and such. So I think that was one of the best experiences I had project-wise in project period, because thesis is also a project, and that is definitely the best project experience I have experienced by far. Before I get to that, in my second year, I also had another extracurricular type of activity going on, and that is that because there weren't a lot of things for physics students at the time at my faculty, because what was really more popular for my program was biology and chemistry, I wanted a space where people can nerd out about physics, mathematics, and astronomy, and because of that, I started the initiative to launch a club, an astronomy club, such that there is a space for people to do that. And that was a really nice thing because, again, it forced me, especially in my second year, because that's when I did this stuff, like I ran it throughout all of my second year, it forced me to, but again, I have to learn about leadership skills and delegating tasks between people and participants. But also, it just was a nice way to meet up other students and such. And most importantly, like I'm grateful that I was able to pass it on and have other students still continue to carry it on and try their best basically to keep it running till this day, which I'm super happy of, because I think that's a really great way to kind of build a sense of community, especially for students in a program such as mine, which has people of various interests, but that are specifically interested in physics themselves. So that I think was one of the best part, you could say, outside of uni, besides my social experiences at Maastricht. So in my third year, in both my second and third year, things were rough every now and then because there were many things happening at the same time, but I still managed to pass my courses and such. In my third year, especially the first semester, it got quite rough. The courses were intense. I was experiencing many other things as well, so it was not the best of times, but at the end, like especially at the end of that first semester, I really connected with some of my closer friends in Maastricht. So like that social aspect, I started to notice I really value it, like besides university. And I think that was a really important thing to have learned about myself because the social circle, even if a very small but intimate one, is one that can really push you, either study-wise by organizing study sessions and such, and also like just social-wise by hanging out, doing fun things, and just enjoying other aspects of life. And especially as a student, because the amount of time, even if limited, is a type of freedom and lack of responsibility that I know won't be the case when I start working. So it really made me start to enjoy those aspects of the student experience as well. And yeah, that I think was one of the best parts of my third year because at the second half of my third year, like after finishing courses, I had to do thesis, and thesis also was again really interesting, but a really busy work and busy time. But it was a really fascinating thing. I talked all about what I did in this video right here, which you can check. And the two things I think I really liked about my thesis is, well, first and foremost, my supervisor, like he was really good at guiding me on both the technical sides of things, like all the coding aspects, which I wasn't really comfortable with at first, up to a point where I really was comfortable and was able to write out my own codes without looking up too much or anything, which was just, that felt really empowering getting to that point. And also on the more research side of things. So like, for example, I'd read a paper or two and then make highlights, make notes for myself, and then I'd go to him and we'd go through these like highlights and bullet points of the paper together. He'd ask me critically on what to think about, what variables to consider and what not to consider. So it was a dynamic that I enjoyed learning wise so much more than the regular course experience. And again, even though personally I'm not a fan of, for example, stuff like standardized exams, I get the point why they're there, like, and I do see the relevance of them. Like, they're a really good objective way to, in a short period of time, see how well a student worked on the stuff that he or she needed to learn and how they're able to efficiently like put that and communicate that in some finite span of time. So I get the reason why it exists, and I think it is important. But what I want to say with that is that I think task-taking skills like completing courses and you could say more project-based learning, like doing projects or doing a thesis and just further research, I can definitely notice that there's a difference. And even though I only experienced like undergraduate research, let's say, and I know that it can be much more demanding onwards. I can still notice how that style of working, that style where you have deadlines, but they're a bit more realistic, they're not as artificially stringent as an exam, and also that allowing you of a time to dive deeper into the material and think creatively about how to solve problem instead of having to rely on specific methods. I like how that is, and that's something I also found out like in that time span, that I really like the more research aspects of things. So even if that means tolerating more courses and such, I would happily do so if it allows me to get to a point where all of my focus is eventually something like this. That was kind of a mental motivation for me at the time of like, and even till this day, of when I get into a master's where I know I have to do more courses, I'll endure it because I know that at the end I'm getting to a place where I'm doing something I really like. So at the end, I finished my bachelor's and I got a really nice grade for my thesis. So I'm really happy of that. I also had managed to spend time with my friends again. And yeah, that goes to August. So I moved and now I'm in a different city, and I commute basically to the University of Amsterdam, the Science Park, to do my theoretical physics program. So how is this in contrast to my bachelor's? Well, the semester is again separated into three periods, where the third period is again 4 weeks, but here it is not a project period, it's just courses. Well, depending on which track you follow. Like I think the astrophysics and biophysics people do have projects in these periods, but theory people and some other tracks just have courses. And more specifically, though, the first and second period, instead of 6 weeks, it's 8 weeks, which may seem a bit more decent, and it is compared to 6 short, intense weeks, but it still feels as intense, if not more, than in my bachelor's, because you got to take in mind that master's courses are way more detail oriented compared to bachelor's level courses. Like, it's really objectively much more intense. Like, if I were to grab lecture notes of courses I'm taking now compared to like then, like the content would be very dense, very hard, and all in a very short span of time. So you really definitely, I think most people, even some of the most clever people I know in my program, do struggle at least with some aspects of the workload. And it's a very normal thing, but despite that, it's also still a very frustrating thing also. So when the year started, like especially in my first period, now I'm in like the fifth week of my second period. But in the first period, it was quite rough because it was quite an adjustment to get used to the intensity, how hard these courses are, and everything, while also navigating like the logistics of still having to complete stuff like my moving papers and such, which if you've moved, you know how tedious this stuff can be. It can be even more tedious if you're moving across different countries or continents even. So I have major respect for international students because of this. But even locally, like it's still quite a progress. So I was still arranging that while also starting uni. But also in the second week of that of uni, like in the second week of September, basically, I got quite ill. Like I got chicken pox because I never got that when I was younger. And I don't know, maybe if you might be able to see it through the camera, but I still have kind of the remnant spots of that left. But that got me quite ill because it makes you quite sick as an adult, much more compared to when you're younger. So that meant at least like 5 days or something, like I couldn't really do much. And yeah, I felt quite behind on my course content. And yeah, it kind of made me definitely doomed to having to possibly retake one or two of my graduate level courses. And I did have to retake like two of them, two out of the three that I took, which again, I had to retake quite a lot of exams in my bachelor's as well. And I think that's perfectly fine. But it's just, yeah, it's just something that was out of my control this time. And also, it is really, really time consuming to prepare for exams here. So, although that was a very daunting thing, I think the most daunting thing I experienced in my master's, like now, is that you're surrounded by incredibly like talented and very smart people, let's say. And honestly, that's not to take away from your own accomplishments. Like I know for myself that I have accomplished quite a bit, and I am good in quite a lot of extent. But I have to also take into account that people got selected for the masters because they're also good for a lot of various things. Like they were at their own universities, like really good students or also really ambitious students. So they have their talents. For some people, that might majorly skew over what you accomplish because they might have taken more time or had very specifically physics oriented bachelors in contrast to, for example, me. Or some people maybe even have done a master's before. Like in my social circle, like now that I have in Amsterdam, which is again another tight knit, but really like I really like the circle because they are all really hardworking and smart people, but also that knows how to enjoy their free time also every now and then, which is nice. It's perfect balance. I know a few of them, for example, that came from the Oxbridge, like some that came from Cambridge, and I can see basically that one of them even already did almost a full part three. So they've seen quantum field theory and stuff before, whereas like for me, I'm learning a lot of this stuff for the first time formally at least. So it was quite basically daunting to sit in classes and see how these people are quite ahead of you, whereas you're still struggling on understanding, I don't know, the very basics of what wick contractions are or something. So yeah, you feel basically quite like an imposter is what I want to summarize this to. But the thing I'm noticing that is helping with that, at least to some extent, is instead of just wallowing in how intimidating that feels, and it feels really intimidating, I try to kind of humbly accept that fact and just ask these students how they prepare, how they practice. I studied with them and work on problems together. And that really helps because they slowly at least give me that same, you could say, level of confidence and skills and tools and study strategy that is bringing me to a point where I'm also getting better at understanding this stuff. And even if it meant, for example, failing a course or two to get to a point like that, I needed to switch again my study strategy, but at least I learned it a little bit sooner than all the way at the end of my first year now. And that is instead of, for example, what I used to do, which is just diving a lot into the theory, getting a broad, you could say, scope, and then practicing problems, I have to just jump into problems. Like I have to jump into problems, and even if it doesn't feel natural to me, like the more I work on problems, the more I figure out what I need to know explicitly for exams, and go back to theory whenever there's a gap. That seems like such a simple thing, but I think ingraining that deeply into my mind is such a shift that I'm still, you could say, slowly coming to terms with, but I notice that I have to do it because much like the quote of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the different result, I cannot go on doing the exact same thing I used to do and expect different outcomes. The outcome is still going to be the same. So I had to switch it up and to see how it goes. And seeing how that goes is what I will see, basically. But for now, I think it is a strategy that is slowly but surely paying off. That is basically where I am at. Throughout all of this, I haven't mentioned hobbies, but I do have every now and then some time to do the things I like. For example, I think I mentioned it before, but I hang out with my friends, and my friends are also interested in a lot of the same things I am. So museums, going to movie theaters and such. So I do stuff like that with them, which is nice. But I also still every now and then manage to read. Like for example, on my daily commute to university, I use train rides usually to read, and I am actually reading two books. Well, one of them most, like you could say, intensely, and the other one I wish to get through when I finish the first one. The first one is called Quantum Drama by Jim Baggett and John Heilbronn. And I really like this book because it's a really good history book on quantum mechanics. And also, it is mainly tackling the whole debate between Einstein and Bohr about the nature of quantum mechanics, because there's a very deep interpretational question with quantum mechanics as to what this theory actually means. What is the wave function? If you've learned a little bit about quantum mechanics, then you know that this wave function description of things like particle and such is really a mathematical tool, and the real physical thing is when you take the amplitude of the wave function, that it tells you the probability of where you'll find it. But before taking the amplitude, you don't know really what this thing is, and there's a really deep interpretational question there that Einstein posed to Bohr and some of the others at Göttingen in Germany at least. And yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to read about, because entanglement also is that one aspect of quantum mechanics which I never felt comfortable with. Like it always feels really iffy. I can do the technical things, like I can take the trace of a density matrix and yada yada yada, but like really like intuitively like getting what all of this stuff means is really hard for me, much more so than even quantum field theory stuff, which is kind of at least calculationally way more demanding than non-relativistic quantum mechanics. But I think this book is making me appreciate that area of things a little bit more, and especially I think it might make me appreciate questions in foundations of quantum mechanics as well as quantum information theory a little bit more, because both I think are really interesting areas of physics now. But besides this, I'm also reading a novel. I'm reading this Kazuo Ishiguro novel called The Buried Giant, because I heard that it tackles really interesting themes, and I like that with novels nowadays. Like, my new refound joy of reading novels every now and then is not only because it helps me distract, like novels are a great distraction, but also there's usually very human element themes in them, and I think that's really nice because they can teach you quite a lot about yourself, sometimes even more so than things like self-help books. Like, if you analyze characters, you can really create analogies with your own life and like really enjoy them. It's a reason also I liked the bits that I read about Fyodor Dostoevsky, because I think he has a very similar style of themes with things that can really make you introspect a lot more. So this is something especially I hope to purely dedicate my time to after I finish this book, which I'm almost like about halfway through. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting to Kazuo Ishiguro's book and just, yeah, continuously reading. The only thing is, I can't promise you, as I did before, like when I'm gonna upload reviews and stuff, because really, the reading and such that I'm doing so at like a tortoise pace, like really slowly, because with university, I simply don't have the time. And I know I said that before, but objectively, there's not enough time in the day for me to like continuously dedicate to reading and such. Like, I can do so with a lot of discipline, and but I'm using that discipline for other stuff, like the mini stuff like socializing and like keeping consistent with socializing, as well as like going for walks and going to museums and trying to get into exercising and meal prepping and such. Like, that's the stuff I'm reserving that energy of discipline to, in order to also maintain reading a fun thing for me, because I really want to keep enjoying that. So yeah. But I hope this gave you a really nice update about things. Like, I know it's been a little bit longer than I originally anticipated, but yeah, I wanted to just give you the full gist of things. And let me know in the comments section down below if there's something you wanna like talk about. Let's say, did you find maybe relatable, or just that you have questions about? I hope to not see you in the too distant future, and I hope you personally are taking care and enjoying the Christmas holidays that is coming up, because I know I am. Like, the streets are having the lights, you have the nice smells and the food and everything. Like, it's getting in that time of year again, so that's always really nice. So yeah, I hope you are taking care, and bye bye.